Welcome to Roots and Futures. I am Dr. Jasmine Harris, Department Chair of Africana Studies at Metropolitan State University. This is a platform for amplifying local and global Black experiences. We're going to be talking about Black communities. We're going to be talking to Black people and trying to understand the connections and disconnections across the diaspora. So join us. Well, hello. That was just two nerdy people talking about
socialism and
and rewriting Marx and rethinking Marx. So maybe we'll come back to that another day.
I think so.
Yes,
especially insofar as the state of the black population is concerned in America.
Yes,
and maybe blacks in general around the world.
Yeah, I mean that's what's driving me to say I want someone to rethink Marx in this sort of late stage capitalist, very racially hierarchical modern society to see,
And then of course I think we may want to sort of brush up on Frantz Fanon.
Oh yes, yes, the sociology of the oppressed.
Exactly,
one of my favorites.
Exactly.
Well, welcome back. I am Dr. Jasmine Harris, and this is another episode of Roots and Futures.
And I'm Pius Kamau, and I'm very happy to be here.
So we are going to jump right in. Today we are talking about the resolution that was put forth in front of the United Nations and the vote. So today, instead of starting with a quote, I'm going to start with some of the language directly from the resolution. This was presented by Ghana, the country of Ghana, and here is some of the emphasis. The resolution emphasized, quote, "The trafficking of enslaved Africans and racialized chattel enslavement of Africans as the gravest crime against humanity, by reason of the definitive break in world history, scale, duration, systemic nature, brutality, and enduring consequences that continue to structure the lives of all people through racialized regimes of labor, property, and capital." Now, before we start, let me just give a breakdown of the votes, if I can find it in front of me. Let's see. If I remember correctly, 123 countries voted in favor of this resolution defining the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity. 3 countries opposed it. You guessed it, the United States, Israel, and unsurprisingly, Argentina. Yep. Yeah. And then 52 abstentions, including all of the UK and European Union nations. So it passes with that 123 votes, but some interesting oppositions and abstentions, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm impressed that the Ghanaians were willing to bring that up, and secondly to say I'm happy that the United Nations took it up. Now, of course, the question is what do we do with that without a vote, and what does it mean that a whole block of European nations did not participate? I suppose in some ways, since they did not oppose it in the same way that the United States voted against it, may also have some meaning. Or what do you think?
I think that the abstentions and the oppositions reflect a portion of the Western world, as we call it, that is still uninterested and unwilling to appropriately grapple, right, in the public discourse with what happened. the United States delegation said that one of the reasons that they opposed it was because the resolution implies legal responsibility for acts that were not illegal via international law at the time. And, you know, if that is going to be the stipulation for votes around things like this, then what has been true remains true, right? Which is that the people in power, the people who are the ones committing the oppression, also get to be the ones after the fact, right? Many, many hundreds of years removed, to decide whether we should care about that or not, right?
Yeah.
There were lots of things that have been legal in this country and in countries around the world at some time throughout history that government officials of those nations have been willing to come out later and say, this was wrong, right? We interned hundreds of thousands of Japanese people in this country after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And not only did the federal government come out later and say that was wrong, but those people were also paid reparations, you know, as restitution for the traumas that they experienced. But as we continue to see in Western narratives, slavery is exempt from that in some ways, and people continue to feel like it was a justifiable offense, that the ends justified the means, right, in terms of the economies that were created on the backs of enslaved people throughout the transatlantic slave trade. And so it's status quo. There's no change in my mind.
Yeah. So that's an interesting argument. You know, the American argument. I mean, that it was not illegal in 1700s and 1600s. So if it wasn't, then what was it? Number one. I mean, that's one thing we need to define. The second thing too is, why was it abolished? You know, I mean, if you think that it's okay, why do you abolish it? Do you abolish it because it's illegal? And then, of course, number three, the civil war between the North and the South was ostensibly, as a result of slavery, I believe. You know. The very fact that 500,000 people died was proof in itself, in my mind, in any case, was proof that it was wrong and it was illegal, and that the people who had been enslaved deserved not just freedom, but also recompense. At least that's in my mind. I think, I would think that's logical.
Well, I mean, it is logical, right? But the problem with American chattel slavery in particular, that piece of the transatlantic slave trade, is that the American response to it has never been logical, right? It's always been this chaotic, illogical institution that a small portion of the population controlled and earned, copious amounts of wealth from, while the majority of society was at least mildly against it and, found it distasteful at the very least to have to think about it or to see the violence if it was ever, in their faces. That wasn't something that they wanted to engage in. And yet, even as the civil wars have raged on and people were dying and enslaved people were men in particular, but women as well, were fleeing plantations in the South to Union Army outposts, you had, federal messaging talking about this as not just being about enslavement, but about states' rights. Right.
Well, we know that's nonsense.
Nonsense, right? Totally illogical, as we understand that there are particular states that care about states' rights, and those are the ones that have enslaved people and depend on that labor for the prosperity of their own economies, right? And then post-emancipation, maybe in part, especially because Abraham Lincoln is assassinated so soon after after the emancipation of Black people post the Civil War, that instead of punishing the Confederate armies for treason, right, which is the logical response to something like that when, such a large percentage of the population is killed as a result. Instead, we almost immediately, and when I say we, I mean the American government at the time, right, go into this sort of reconciliation project, trying to bring the citizens from these southern states back into the fold as if nothing happened, right? And that's not usually the result of a civil war.
Yeah, when the prisoners people were in fact taken back into governance.
Yeah.
And I think it's as if the Constitution was still whole for them, And if I remember right, I think the next president was from the South.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's why you had a watering down of whatever laws there were, to give Black people freedom, and I don't know. It's very.
Well, and that's what I mean by it being illogical, right?
It is illogical.
That sort of bringing them back into governance, repaying them for the loss of their enslaved people. That was a part of the
ridiculous.
Emancipation. An encouragement of now freed people to stay on the plantations that they were on, because they would not be allowed to go to military outposts to volunteer for the military after their presence put the Union Army sort of over the top in terms of bodies, which after you lose 500,000 people, the two armies are really just, trying to outlast one another. Yeah. And one of the reasons that the Union Army was able to outlast the Confederate Army was because they welcomed in enslaved people that had run from the plantations in the South. And so now, post-emancipation, they're telling them, but you can't be a part of the army, so don't do that either. And so this is why this is where you should stay. And so that's why, when we talk about American chattel slavery in the United States, we're not just talking about the enslavement of the people, right? But we're talking about everything that happened after that was made to appease the enslavers, that was made to appease the oppressors. And even now, when we talk about banning books, right, and when conservatives are trying to revamp curriculum, what they're saying out loud, this is an implication reading between the lines, but literally what they're saying out loud is, we don't want our white children to feel bad about enslavement, and so we don't think the horrors of it, the brutality of it, should be taught in schools, right? And that's still, hundreds of years later, this focus on appeasing the oppressors, right, while ignoring the oppressed. And so everything about the way that the United States has gone about the abolishment of American chattel slavery has ignored and made invisible the experiences and the brutality of the people. so that when we get to 2026, the American delegation at the UN can say, well, we oppose this because you're implying that we should be legally responsible for something that was not illegal at the time. And they constantly get to be the arbiters of where the lines are in terms of like how we should think about and what we should talk about in terms of this slave trade.
And I think we have to sort of think about, you know, the position being that to admit it is to admit guilt, you know, and admitting guilt then leads to the next opening the next door, which is you have to pay us, or you have to pay this population of people all the labor that you got from their forefathers,
right?
You know,
Yeah.
and in many ways, I don't think that. The government of the United States is not willing to do that.
No.
Not willing to consider that either. But let me also add one more point, which is when the British abolished slavery, the white slave owners in the Indies were all remunerated. They were all paid. They were paid what loss they were, was calculated for the slaves that they had. Were the slaves given anything at all? No. Nothing. Nothing. Which is really the double standard.
Yeah. Well, and one of the other things that the representative from the United States delegation said in response to the vote and the way that they voted was that to be legally responsible and to suggest the need for reparations is reallocating perhaps billions of American dollars into the hands of people who are many generations removed from the horrors of slavery. That also suggests that, and this is one of the reasons why the transatlantic slave trade in general is perhaps different from other types of slavery that we've seen historically around the world. But it assumes that enslavement happened in a vacuum. And that once it was over, everything that was built by it and for it also disappeared, right? With the enslavement. When in reality, much of our current economy, our current farming, economy, especially in the South, our institutions of higher education, right? We know that Harvard and Princeton and some of these really old schools that were built in the 1600s, George Washington, that they were built on the backs of enslaved people. Yeah. They were the actual ones who put the bricks together on those buildings. So are you going to burn down the Harvard University campus, right? Because a suggestion that the descendants of American chattel slavery should not be the recipients of reparations because of that distance from them ignores all of the things that we can touch and feel and see and taste that were built, created, or developed during enslavement by enslaved people, right? And so this idea that they shouldn't be responsible to pay us, or that we are so far removed from those people that we don't deserve that, ignores how much of the United States was built and still functions in many of the same ways that it did when the enslaved people were building them.
The one of the difficult things, at least in my mind, is how Jim Crow, for example, the Jim Crow laws, continued to somehow re-traumatize black people. Sure. How Well, I mean, you have all these men coming back from the Second World War, going to their homes in the South, and many of them being lynched.
Right.
You know, all these soldiers who had fought for America. You know, I mean, those men, at the very least, needed to be compensated. You know, for the work they did for America, you know, and for the pains that they suffered after they got back. If nothing else,
Right.
you know.
But then they had to come back and be black.
Right. I mean, it's like you were slaves when you left, and you're slaves when you came back.
A lot of Vietnam vets, black Vietnam vets, have talked about that. Black Iraqi vets have talked about that. You know, going over to another country, fighting in the name of the United States, and then coming back and being exposed to the same kinds of racism and degradation, right, that they experienced before they went out there. I think that when we are talking about this, you know, reparations and like recompense and the connections to those things, you know, Jim Crow, we talk about that like it's some boogeyman that, you know, existed 100 years ago. But my friends and I are having a little vacation in Santa Fe this weekend, and I was going to drive because it's, you know, 5.5 hours, and the tickets were really expensive at the time that I was looking. And my mother, a boomer, a person who, when she was 2 years old, moved from Little Rock, Arkansas to Milwaukee, Wisconsin with her parents and her older siblings because the attempted integration of Little Rock Central High School, which was just down the road from my grandparents' home, was so traumatic. Absolutely, right? Yeah. You know, my mother she's not yet 70, and this is a part of her personal experience, and she was so concerned about me driving from Denver to Santa Fe simply because of the sheer number of sundown towns that still exist between here and there. That she was like, listen, I'll buy the plane ticket for you. I just don't want you to drive. And, you know, I'm going to meet friends that are not black. And she was like, that sort of short drive over that area of the country means less to them, right? They can throw those things away. But what if you have to leave late and now you're outside of Pueblo at 6 o'clock and the sun is going down and you have to stop somewhere? Are you sure that you're going to be safe in those, you know, small mountain towns as you make your way down to the Southwest? And I couldn't say for sure, you know, that I would be safe. And it's 2026. And so, you know, we think of Jim Crow as whites only water fountains and lynchings that were celebrated as picnics, right, where people would come and watch people get lynched and then have lunch under the body, right? But Jim Crow still exists in 2026, and what it looks like is a black person getting pulled over in a white area simply because they don't belong there after a certain amount of time of being unsure of where you can use the bathroom. When I was driving from Illinois to North Carolina for my first job after I finished my PhD at Wake Forest University, and we had to drive through West Virginia. And I was with my first husband at the time, and he was white and Japanese, and we stopped at this gas station in like nowhere, West Virginia, but we really had to stop because we were almost out of gas. And there are Confederate flags hanging, and I literally like put the seat all the way back so that people could not see me in the window. And I was like, you're on your own. Good luck. Like, I'm not going in there. Who knows what's going to happen? You only look marginally Asian. Maybe they won't catch it. while you're paying, but pay quickly and come back out here because they may clock you as well, right? And that was 2014,
Yeah.
and so this idea that we are so far removed is a white supremacist narrative that is about removing that guilt. That white people have decided they do not want to feel guilty about slavery anymore, which means that we don't talk about it. We don't think about it as this sort of negative thing, and instead think about it as something that helped build our industrial revolution in the United States, and something that we came to our senses on, and now everybody's equal, and we've had a black president, and no more white guilt about this.
I would like us to try and draw some parallels here between American slavery and number two, colonialism, white on black colonialism, and thirdly, I would like us to talk about Haiti and Haitians fighting the colonialists and actually getting back their freedom, and what the white world did to them.
Then they punish them. They continue to punish them for that freedom.
You know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's truly interesting because if I remember right, the Haitians were levied a large amount of money that they had to pay to France. I mean, does that make sense to you?
For their freedom, they had to pay a ransom, essentially, for 100 years.
And if you don't pay us, we're going to recolonize you again. We're going to reoccupy the country. I mean, the sickness of the white mind. Don't you think? I mean,
well, it's the oppressor getting to dictate the terms to the oppressed, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, you did get your freedom, but it's going to cost you.
It's going to cost
right?
you, yeah.
It makes me think about the slave revolts in the United States,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That we are often, again, sort of socialized to believe that enslaved people were never trying to take their freedom.
When there was somebody called Nat Turner. If I remember right,
Yeah.
I mean, and he was fighting for his and his people's freedom.
Yeah. Burned down an entire plantation and killed several people, and he wasn't the only one, right? That there were lots of these revolts that enslaved people were engaging in sort of resistance in little ways all the time.
Yeah.
And essentially from the moment that they were enslaved, and from their time on these ships, right? We've heard stories about revolts happening on the ships, people jumping to their deaths,
exactly,
right? Rather than be enslaved. And so there was this constant resistance, which says something about the horrors of what people were experiencing. And I think that what American conservatives in particular have done a very good job of over the last 100 years is removing that piece of the story from most people's sort of lexicons, because they saw what was happening in Haiti, right? And American plantation owners
we don't want that
ramped
to happen.
up the violence,
Yeah.
right? Because we don't want that happening. We have to make an example of people like Nat Turner so that others will not try to revolt. And yet they still did. And so, sometimes I think the story of the Haitian Revolution is positioned against American chattel slavery to say, well, these people really against it, right? And you have some younger folks, and unfortunately, I think maybe Kanye West said this like a decade ago, but this idea that, if we were one of the enslaved, we would have not let those things happen to us, right? And it's like, sure, you might have tried to revolt. Lots of people did. You might have tried to run. You might have tried to organize along the Underground Railroad, like folks did, right? But the system in the United States was so afraid of widespread resistance that constantly the brutality of it was ramped up until you get to this place where even the president of the United States, who doesn't technically disagree with slavery, is like, we got to get rid of this because it's become so overly violent. It's become such an American atrocity that we can't allow it to continue, even though we wish we could. But that fear of resistance, I think, starting with the Haitian Revolution, really has a long-standing impact on what then happened in the U.S.
Yeah. And so the other question I had was colonialism. Now, of course, I mean, America, didn't colonize. Well, he did colonize some other people. He went to the Philippines and Puerto Rico, etc. But when you think of colonialism, I normally think of France and the British and the Dutch, for example.
Belgians.
Yeah, and the Belgians, of course, my God, yeah. Well, you had the Belgians, Leopold. Leopold goes to the Congo and declares the Congo as his own private property and ends up killing 15 million blacks. I don't care who you are. You cannot justify that. And I don't care who you are. You have to pay those people back.
Right.
Those people need to be, there has to be reparations. As you know, I'm from Kenya. And in the 1950s, we had the Mau Mau fight, the Mau Mau War, where the blacks were fighting for their land and for their freedom. And many, many, many of us were killed, I think we deserve reparations for that,
Right.
South Africa, where Mandela and the people, Mandela ends up in jail for 27 years. Was he ever paid back for that? I don't think so.
I don't think so, no. Well, and that's why, so we've been sort of focusing on the United States opposition, right?
Right.
But I think that the 52 abstentions, all from the UK
Right.
and Europe, are
And
also
Europe.
very interesting
Exactly.
because, it speaks to this overarching belief, desire amongst white Americans and white Europeans.
Right.
And remember, when we're talking about America at that time, we really are talking about white Europeans because they are the ones who have moved over to colonize the United States. But England, for example, right? They're colonizing Africa, they're colonizing the Caribbean,
India,
right? And it's the gall, right? Where did this belief start that people of European descent had the right to, quote unquote, explore this planet, right? And then name those spaces for themselves. When we were in Rwanda, and learning about the genocide that happened in 1994, before you get to the genocidal piece, they talk about Belgians arriving in the country and immediately purposefully creating this divide, this hierarchy
between the two tribes,
between the Hutu and the Tutsi and the Twa, right? And generating this strife amongst people that before they arrived were living in relative harmony and then leaving, right? I mean, it's very much in line with what the United States has done in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? We go into countries and decide that we know better. and we, change their whole political system, and then we leave the people there who are in the middle of this strife. And then we feign surprise when there is political unrest or when people are murdered, when the country devolves into chaos. And so I think it's so interesting that we have this history of European colonization of African countries, of brown countries more broadly, where that occupation was under the guise of implied ownership, right? And it's like, well, who's implying the ownership? Well, we are. Because we're white, and because we have a boat, and because we're here and we have guns and you don't. Yeah. And so this sort of like abstention, I think the abstention is actually the more egregious response to this resolution, because at least, United States and Israel and Argentina opposing, right? Yeah. They're at least, what do the kids say, standing on business, right? Yeah. They're racist and they know it, and they're just gonna put that out there. I think the European countries abstaining is a reflection of how they've tried to deal with their role in colonization and their role in enslavement throughout history. Europe becomes the first group of countries to make transatlantic slave trade illegal, but they also colonized all of these other places, simultaneously, and continued to own them, where the royal family have homes and servants and, and all of these different colonized areas. And so, that abstention is about the sort of ongoing dissonance that these European countries have.
Yeah, and I think you have to agree, or you have to appreciate that when you go to London or you go to Paris, all these mansions, all these huge castles, who financed them? Those places were financed by the colonies. Right. This is the wealth of other nations, the wealth of other people. And to admit that, that we did anything wrong would mean that maybe we have to begin paying a rent, right? For the palace, right? The palace that we occupy.
Or maybe we need to pay rent for the artifacts that we've stolen from those countries that are in our famous museums that people travel from across the world to come and see.
Well, so the next question I think we need to ask is, so you, Ghana, you brought this resolution to the United Nations. What is it that you want, number one? And number two, what are you going to do about it? What do you think they should do?
That's the harder question, right? Because I started this by saying I don't think anything has changed because the major superpowers of the world either opposed or abstained from the vote. So what is really changing? I think, and one of the things that the United States representative said is that the maybe it was the UK representative I'm thinking of, but that said, well, the what is the role of the United Nations Council? Are we supposed to be keeping the current peace, or are we supposed to be going back in time and relitigating past global atrocities? And I think that the answer is both, because how can you litigate peace in the current, which they're not doing well, right? Given that we seem to be on the verge of World War III here. And so how well can you litigate current peace if we're not, as a council, all on the same page about what has been peaceful or not peaceful colonizing of people and places historically. And so what I think and what I hope that Ghana wants to do next, now that the resolution has passed, right, is to have conversations about what does that mean in terms of a global reckoning of the transatlantic slave trade. Despite what the United States and Israel and the European Union are saying, 123 countries have voted in favor of naming this transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity.
Yeah.
And then using that definition, right? And they say that it's a crime against humanity because of the scale, because of the duration, because of the human lives lost, right? There are all of these specific points. Well, then let's use that definition to talk about what's happening now, right? We need to have resolutions against the genocide of Palestinians by Israelis using that same definition as measurement, right? And we can start talking about other what's going on in Sudan, what's going on in the Congo, right? And using, if we have this definition that has been agreed on by the majority, then let's take that and apply it to how we're going to move forward in peace talks in the current.
There's another thing that I think we need to keep in mind, which is human rights are truly important. And the declaration of slavery being such a horrible crime, then that gives birth to human rights. Mm-hmm. Human rights universally, all across the world. You know, the United Nations should also be overseeing or looking at where human rights are being abused. Mm-hmm. You know, because maybe you can't do too much about what happened in 18th and 19th centuries, mm-hmm. but boy, we can sure do something about today.
Exactly.
You know, right. Which, like you're saying, I mean, it was happening in Palestine, mm-hmm. What are we going to do with Iran, by the way? Are we going to colonize them mm-hmm. after we conquer them? Mm-hmm. That's another interesting question, isn't it?
Are we going to conquer them, right? And like, what happens if you know? I don't even know if that's even on the table anymore. And so, what does that mean for a country that has a lot of power, yes. hasn't utilized it to its full extent, yes. you know, over the last 50 years or so, right. but is being encouraged to do so, right? What role does the United Nations play in negotiating the relationship between Iran and, you know, the countries that it's bombing, you know, provoked? But
yeah. Well, then this is going to be a bit of a sidestepping a little bit out of the debate or the discussion, which is, I think the United Nations could have done much more than it did in Iran, you know, to either ameliorate what the mullahs were doing, mm-hmm. But it did not do that.
Right.
The human rights in Iran have been completely demolished.
Eroded.
Eroded.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the sort of conundrum
yes.
about all of this,
right.
is that when you have countries and you're trying to get them to agree on human rights, which seems straightforward, but when you have the oppressor making the rules about how to oppress, it becomes much more complicated.
Absolutely.
So
I mean, I think it's wonderful that the United Nations did pass the resolution. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens after that? Right. That's another story.
Right. Yeah.
You know, but at least that is in the books.
It's in the books, and I think most importantly, what's in the books are the oppositions and the abstentions. Those will go down in history, and people will come back to that and use it as a way to understand the way that these westernized white supremacist countries work.
Yeah. People are not sleeping. The world is not asleep.
Right. Yeah,
The world is awake.
they're starting to wake up.
Well, very good.
All right.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes, that was a great conversation. Thank you all for joining us for another episode of Roots and Futures, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.